Starting with the develop portfolio communication management plan, the first process, the figure below provides an overview of communication management, including stakeholder and communication requirements analysis, the focus of consultation and participation of stakeholders for identifying risks, and the flow and input of communication management to portfolio information and reporting. So by looking at this figure of the communication management, you will see that we will start with conducting stakeholder analysis to determine who are the stakeholders and what are their communication requirements. And then we will conduct the communication requirement analysis to determine their communication preferred methods and frequency. And this will serve as a strong input to the communication management of the portfolio. And we will do also stakeholder consultation and participation for the risk identification process, which will support the communication management as well. Regarding the portfolio information, we will start with the communication requirements analysis and communication methods, which will feed into the portfolio management information system, the PMIS tool that we will use in the managed portfolio information. And it's very important for the PFMP exam, and this will feed to the portfolio information and reports. Portfolio communication facilitates a two-way effective dialogue between affected internal and external stakeholders, individuals or groups, including examples of the stakeholders where two-way communication will be conducted, includes executive managers, operations managers, governing bodies, sponsors, project program portfolio managers, suppliers and external resource providers, regulatory bodies, and others. All these are key stakeholders where the portfolio communication plan will facilitate a two-way effective dialogue of information. In order to develop the portfolio communication management plan, stakeholder identification and analysis is necessary in addition to the determination of communication requirements. This is why there is a strong connection between managing the stakeholders' engagement and managing the portfolio communication. We cannot determine the stakeholders' communication requirements without knowing who are the stakeholders of your portfolio. In planning portfolio communication, the portfolio management plan is a great input as it might identify some of the primary stakeholders such as the executive managers and sponsors who are accountable for the success of the portfolio. Therefore, the portfolio management plan will be an input to this process. Planning may uncover additional stakeholders that require or benefit from the knowledge of portfolio progress, performance, and changes. These additional discoveries should be reflected as updates to the portfolio management plan. Therefore, there will be an update to the portfolio management plan as an outcome of this process. A comprehensive list of stakeholders is compiled. It's important to determine their information needs and the preferred mode of communication. Developing a strong communication management plan will require inputs from a variety of other portfolio management processes, such as performance and risk management. As mentioned earlier, there will be a strong connection and integration between the portfolio communication management processes and other portfolio management processes. Portfolio communication recognizes the broad and varied stakeholders from executive management through individuals performing the basic tasks to third parties. The information needs of portfolio stakeholders are much more varied than with project-level communication, primarily because of the breadth and variety of stakeholders. So it's expected that managing communications on a portfolio level will require more efforts than managing communication on a project or a program level. Transparency in planning portfolio management reporting is important for discovering early if there are any elements missing and to manage risk due to insufficient or inconsistent communication. Transparent communication is also valuable when planning for optimal utilization of resources, so you need to keep transparency in mind while you are planning for portfolio communication. The ITTOs of this process, you will need 5 inputs: the portfolio roadmap, the portfolio management plan, the portfolio reports, and the portfolio process assets, while the tools and techniques of this process will be the stakeholder analysis, which is the most important one, elicitation techniques, and communication requirement analysis, while the outputs of this process will be the portfolio management plan updates in addition to the portfolio process assets updates. The data flow diagram of this process is showing that we will need inputs from the defined portfolio roadmap process, develop portfolio management plan, and define portfolio processes, in addition to some inputs from the portfolio documents and the portfolio reports. The outputs of this process will be archived in the portfolio documents and will be used in the managed portfolio information process, which I will explain in the following lecture. The 5 inputs we will need, starting with the portfolio, as it includes the list of approved and potential portfolio components, as well as other descriptive information on the components such as dependencies, level of effort, points of contact, and other dashboard type information. Information about the portfolio component itself can be found in the portfolio, and it will affect the way how you are going to plan the portfolio communication. Knowledge of the components of the portfolio might have an effect on the communication approach used for consolidating and standardizing communication and evaluating the communication strategy at the portfolio level. The portfolio list of components is critical in understanding the full scope of communication needed. You cannot plan for communication on the portfolio level without understanding and knowing all the portfolio components. This is why the portfolio is the first input to this process. The second input is the portfolio roadmap, which helps with understanding of the structure of the portfolio, interdependencies among the portfolio components, and how all of the portfolio components will fit together in order to lay out the plan for achieving organizational strategy and objectives. So similar to the portfolio roadmap will help you understand the portfolio components, how they fit together, and how is the portfolio structured, in addition to the interdependencies between the portfolio components. Clear and timely communication of this roadmap and any changes to the roadmap is a fundamental part of the portfolio communication. Why? Because the portfolio communication management plan may include information about interdependencies among the portfolio's components that could impact portfolio communication objectives. So the up-to-date portfolio roadmap will serve as a very important input while you are planning for the portfolio communication. Any change to the interdependencies, any change to the timelines of the portfolio components might trigger a need to change or update the portfolio communication. The third input is the portfolio management plan, as it will provide you with the scope of the portfolio and the initial list. This is the most important thing the portfolio management plan will provide you with: the initial list of primary, internal, and external portfolio stakeholders, including the governance model. The portfolio management plan is the guiding artifact that establishes portfolio level dependencies and constraints to allow for effective oversight. It will also describe the planned approach for approving, prioritizing, and scheduling the portfolio components and setting the priorities. So the sections of the portfolio management plan, like the list of stakeholders, the governance model, the portfolio oversight, all these sections are important to consider while you are planning for communication. All elements of the portfolio management plan have communication requirements, such as the risks that need to be communicated to the governing body, the portfolio manager, and the stakeholders. Changes in the portfolio management plan may introduce new stakeholders or new communication requirements. So you need always to revisit the list of stakeholders in the portfolio management plan to determine if there are any new stakeholders, as this will trigger the need of conducting stakeholder analysis and determining the stakeholders' communication requirements. The fourth input will be portfolio reports. A lot of reports will help you, or you need to consider while you are planning for the portfolio communication: status, progress, performance, risk, summary reports of all governance decisions about all portfolio components. All these are inputs that will serve you in this process. Portfolio performance reports can provide information on the total investment in each portfolio component, which serves as the communication of assessed portfolio value. Some organizations communicate with dashboards to provide status information at a glance. The format and content of these reports should be defined in the Portfolio Communication Management Plan, providing templates, standard forms, and procedures for planned portfolio reporting. So, various types of reports will be useful while you are planning for portfolio communication. And the last input will be portfolio process assets related to planning portfolio communication, includes the roles and responsibilities of the portfolio manager, status reports, risk profile, risk assessment, issues log, portfolio forecasts, governance decisions, funding decisions, resource decisions, portfolio value assessments, and delegations of responsibility for communication. All these can be found in the portfolio process assets. Now, once we have those 5 inputs, we will start applying the tools and techniques for this process to develop the portfolio communication management plan, starting with the stakeholder analysis. The purpose of stakeholder analysis is to identify the stakeholders, determine the different individuals and groups, and determine their concerns, interests, and influence. For portfolio management, it's important to understand the stakeholders' interest and influence in the portfolio investment in order to develop the portfolio communication management plan. So the most important technique and the first technique you will use in this process is the stakeholder analysis. We cannot design the communication needs of the stakeholders without knowing them, without knowing their key characteristics, what are their needs, what are their preferred communication methods, and so on. This is why we will be relying on the stakeholder analysis, and we will start by identifying the stakeholders, either individuals or groups. After gathering information about who the portfolio stakeholders are, the process of stakeholder analysis captures information about each stakeholder and the relationships among them. Stakeholder analysis also includes stakeholder classification. So as part of conducting the stakeholders analysis, you can classify stakeholders, and I will show you an example of this shortly. In stakeholder identification, a list of all stakeholders is made. Attributes of the stakeholders are gathered, such as which stakeholder group they are part of. Stakeholders in the same group may have different concerns and interests, and stakeholder concerns and interests may change over time. So it's important to identify a comprehensive list of the possible or potential portfolio stakeholders, define their interests, their concerns, their expectations, their communication requirements. In addition to classifying them in groups, stakeholders are being classified as either external or internal, as shown in this figure. You have the portfolio stakeholders, external and internal. For the external stakeholders, the interest, influence, and communication needs of business partners, competitors, government, industry, etc. All these are external stakeholders to the portfolio. Internal stakeholders includes the business operational stakeholders who are looking to ensure alignment between portfolio components while minimizing negative impact and maximizing positive benefits. So it will be very helpful to categorize stakeholders into internal and external. The stakeholders who need to be informed consistently about the status of the portfolio includes the internal stakeholders within the portfolio who have interest in or influence the delivery of the business change, external stakeholders as well who are outside the scope of the portfolio, but they can influence or need communication from the portfolio sponsors who are owners of the portfolio components, and the portfolio manager. Assigning stakeholders into groups and classifying them as external or internal will help you target the optimal type of communication and whether various communications can be grouped to match the stakeholder grouping. In addition, once grouped, analysis can be done on that group's ability to influence the portfolio. For assessing influence of the key stakeholders, you will identify using the stakeholder analysis technique. You can ask such questions. Who are the members of the governing body for the portfolio? Which of the stakeholders are thought leaders, influencers, or early adopters? What level of authority does each stakeholder have affecting the portfolio and the organization? What is their political influence in the organization? Is their role as a stakeholder recognized by the organization? What are the interrelationships among the stakeholders? And which of the stakeholders can significantly influence others? In order to assess the stakeholders based on their influence, you can use this list of questions. After assigning levels of influence, stakeholder analysis is also performed to assess the level of interest and urgency in communication by each stakeholder. So at the minimum, you need to assess the stakeholders based on their influence, their level of interest in the portfolio and its deliverables, and the urgency of communication. A simple way of devising a stakeholder communication management strategy based on the stakeholder analysis is to use influence and interest levels mapped to quadrant, and this strategy is very important for the exam. If a stakeholder has low interest in the reports coming out of the communication, for example, and has a low level of influence and authority, then the strategy might be to plan to minimize the effort in reaching this stakeholder. Now, the simple matrix showing or mapping the stakeholders into their level of influence and level of interest. For the level of influence, it can be low and high, and the same for the level of interest. Now, how you will benefit from this stakeholder communication management strategy? If you have a stakeholder with low level of influence and low level of interest, you can apply the minimal effort. Low influence and high interest, you need to keep informed. High influence and low interest, you need to have active communications, while high interest and high influence, you need to have active communications and engagement. An understanding of the core communication needs of each stakeholder is also necessary for planning. What kind of information is each stakeholder interested in, and what type of communication do they expect to ensure portfolio success? The table below is an example of the stakeholder matrix, which we usually use in the stakeholder analysis with 4 columns. This is a simple matrix mapping the stakeholder groups: portfolio sponsors, portfolio governance, portfolio management office, contract management team, and portfolio component teams. You will map them with the stakeholder roles, stakeholder interest, and stakeholder expectations. So this is an example of the stakeholder matrix you will have after conducting the stakeholder analysis. The second group of techniques will be the elicitation techniques, and it is expected to use the elicitation techniques as I cannot plan for portfolio communication and define the communication requirements of each stakeholder without gathering information about those stakeholders. As portfolio stakeholders and stakeholder communication requirements change over time, it's important for the portfolio manager to engage with stakeholders to ensure their needs are being met and they are aligned with the communication management plan. This might be achieved through interviews, questionnaires, surveys, stakeholder meetings, and lessons learned sessions. So in order to gather information about the stakeholders' needs regarding information management, reporting, and communication, you can rely on techniques like the interviews, questionnaires, surveys, meetings, and lessons learned sessions. By meeting with stakeholders, for example, the portfolio manager can review the plan communication and get feedback on the plan. So you can conduct also feedback sessions in order to make sure everyone is aligned on the developed portfolio communication management plan. Brainstorming can be helpful as well while identifying new stakeholder groups previously not discovered. And in these meetings, portfolio stakeholders can confirm or change the communication requirements. The last technique will be the communication requirements analysis. And in this technique, the vehicle or tool used to communicate information to the stakeholders and the frequency planned is evaluated to determine if changes should be made. So the purpose why we are conducting the communication requirement analysis is to determine the vehicle or the tool we will use to communicate information with stakeholders. At the same time, to determine the frequency planned to communicate with the stakeholders. A list of available communication methods are charted to evaluate alternatives and ensure the optimal vehicle is being used to meet stakeholder needs. This is a question I had in my PFMP exam about the purpose of using the communication requirement analysis. Reviews are conducted to identify any redundant communication. We want to minimize any redundancy. In some specific situation, some redundancy is intentional to ensure reaching multiple types of recipients, or when intended recipients have varied preferences for receiving information. Choices may need to be made to identify which communication is primary and which should be discontinued. A communication matrix might be used also for capturing and recording the results of the communication requirement analysis. The table below is an example of this matrix showing the communication areas about what the information will be, like the portfolio governance decisions, portfolio dashboard, portfolio performance reports, key risks and issues updates, and resources utilization. The other columns includes the frequency of communication, like weekly or monthly or quarterly, who are the intended recipients, and what will be the communication vehicles we are going to use. You will have such a matrix by conducting the communication requirements analysis. To complete portfolio communication requirement analysis, an assessment should be done for the organizational culture to make sure the communication management plan is suitable for the organization, and let's see how the culture of the organization might affect this plan. If you are working in an organization where the resources are comfortable with technology, we can rely on dashboards, portal, and technology, high-tech tools for communication. While if your organization resources are not comfortable with technology, we might use paper reports and emails. Now we will have two outputs as an outcome of this process. Updates to the portfolio management plan, and for sure it should be updated as we will have the communication management plan as an outcome of this process, and the communication management plan is a component of the portfolio management plan. The portfolio communication management plan will define all communication needs, establishes communication requirements, specifies frequency, and identifies recipients for information associated with the portfolio management process. So all these are sections of the portfolio communication management plan. Stakeholders might require new communication that changes the portfolio management plan. Stakeholder and communication analysis will drive what's intended to be communicated with regard to the portfolio and how it is expected to be communicated. The results of these analyses will be documented in the portfolio communication management plan. The results of conducting the stakeholder analysis and the communication requirements analysis, in addition to the elicitation techniques, all will be documented as part of the portfolio communication management plan. This plan defines the expected process in order to collect information, review, format, and deliver communication about the portfolio. It also sets expectation among project teams regarding the actions and processes necessary to facilitate the critical alignment among people, ideas, and information. Now, there is a risk of having insufficient communication planning, which might result in failure to identify the portfolio risks, or failure to accomplish the portfolio objectives, or increase the duplication of effort, and also reduce the stakeholders' confidence. At a minimum, the communication management plan should include communication objectives, roles and responsibilities for managing communication, identified stakeholders' expectations, planned methods to collect and store data, planned vehicles to access and deliver communication, planned frequency and communication policies or constraints. For the PFMP exam, understand all the sections of the portfolio communication management plan. Portfolio process assets updates will be made, including updates to communication management roles and responsibilities, policies or procedures, tools or templates portfolio key risks and issues, and lessons learned for any knowledge gained on the effectiveness of portfolio communication management. So all these are examples of some of the portfolio process assets that might be updated as an outcome of this process.